I want to talk to you about depression. We talked about anxiety already, and this is a follow up to that. Um, so let's look at statistics first and and a description of this because depression is misunderstood by most people. Um, and sometimes it's called the common cold of psychopathology. That's how rampant it is. Figure's not going to sound that big, but it really is when you do the math. Uh, you see that there are a lot of people affected by this. 6.7% of the U.S. population suffers from some type of depression. And it can run the gamut. Temporary mood to suicidal psychosis. And adolescents obviously are part of the society, so the incidence is includes adolescents. Depression is normal, uh, as weird as that sounds. Uh, Depression being misunderstood, people will make comments like, "Oh, I'm just in a sad mood, but I'm not depressed." Well, yeah, you are. That's that's what depression is. It can be a sad mood. It can be feeling uh, yucky, whatever the case is, and the source is not necessarily uh, the wherewithal, but sometimes the source can increase the feeling of depression. So how do we determine, what do we use? What's the criteria for us to become concerned as a psychologist, or in the case of this class, counseling an adolescent? Because that's what we're concerned with. Adolescent depression is somewhat normal. Uh, Everybody that's listening to this and watching it has had some sort of a depression at some moment in your life. Something, maybe you didn't do well in a course, or maybe whatever, something didn't go right, something you wanted to happen, and boom, you feel yucky, you feel down, but you recover from that. So, but when does it become um, concerning? I guess is the best word to use, and that's when it becomes discouraging and becomes debilitating. And there's some early signs that that's taking place. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. Sad facial expressions, um, a loss of interest in things like important things like school, church, leisure time activities, um, and then it becomes aggravated, and the person becomes more easily agitated, more easily irritated. Uh, it develops into a feeling of inferiority and worthlessness, helplessness, even guilt about something. And as it worsens, then you begin to have physical effects like insomnia, or the opposite, which is called hypersomnia, where you don't sleep, loss of appetite or excessive eating, social withdrawal, uh, pessimistic about everything, can't concentrate, uh, and inability to enjoy what were formerly pleasurable events. So what do? Nothing. People stay home, they stay in the bed, or they whatever they do. They two things that you really need to be aware of, and you can self-assess, by the way, and be honest with yourself, is a constant sad mood and a loss of interest in everything occurring at the same time. So these are the criteria that have to be met for us to begin to consider you as being depressed in a way that needs to be looked into. There are three major categories. Endogenous, that comes from a biochemical disturbance. This is psychiatry here, uh, and that occurs in the hormonal system and the nervous system. And sometimes it can even be brought on, believe it or not, by sickness. COVID produced some depression in many people. It's rather spontaneous, and it normally affects elderly people, or it occurs within the realm of a psychotic disorder. And this is a psychiatric thing to reiterate, because psychology and counseling really can't do much for that. And you may say, well, what's the difference between psychology and counseling? Really nothing. It's the depth of psychotherapy more than it is anything else. Counseling is done in the here and now. Psychotherapy looks into the past. So that's endogenous. Reactive depression, or also known as exogenous, is a result of a real occurrence, an imagined threat, um, uh, and it usually lasts a few months, and then it doesn't really require medical treatment. And this is the kind of depression that normally shows up in an adolescent. Counseling is the usual treatment. We wouldn't go super duper into psychotherapy with this. Counseling can handle it. And then the third kind is called neurotic depression. That's a lifestyle response. That's when you change your behaviors uh, in a response to anxiety. You become depressed related to it. Stress plays a role in this. You know people, I know people who are under, in their perception, maybe extreme stress, and their reaction to it is a depression. So they tend to want to escape from emotions, other emotions, and it develops over quite a long period of time. So there's a chronic uh, aspect to this. There's another type of depression that's not well known by most people. It's called masked depression, and it's hidden by other symptoms. Um, your behaviors become not bizarre but out of character. And what's happening is you're trying to cover uh, an extremely stressful event. I think your textbook uses the loss of a parent, and or even both, and you may you may try to hide that from yourself, or whatever the case is, and you do it by acting out in non-characteristic ways related to you and your personality. Now, let's look at some other types. Those three are the general, and that one little subcategory, that hidden depression thing, that mass depression. Those are the big major categories. Let's look at the particular categories. So this is kind of breakdown of the whole system here. And I'll give you some of the symptoms of this, not a lot. So here we go. Persistent depression. It's also known as dysthymia or chronic depression. This is serious. Um, it's not as intense as the depression that I will end this discussion with, because I'm saving the big for last. But it's not as intense as that one, but it is life disruptive. And that's the key to all of this in terms of the more serious depressions. How disruptive is this in your life? Do you shut down? Do you change behaviors? I mentioned some things a while ago. Loss of interest, for example, overeating, eating, not sleeping, or sleeping all day, or whatever. That list of things I gave you a while ago. This would be inclusive in this persistent depression, but not as intense, and that'll make sense in a minute. postpartum, also known as perinatal depression. This is associated with childbirth, and it usually occurs during a pregnancy or at least somewhere around 4 weeks after birth. And believe it or not, it's associated with women, obviously, because women give birth, but men can share in this. It's almost like what's a good word to use? That sounds like a drug addict here, a contact kind of emotion. You don't really have the depression as the male, but you um, associate the depression because it's with someone that you care about. Seasonal depression, seasonal affective disorder, very common. A lot of us go through this every year because it's normally associated with winter months. I'm not a fan of cold weather. Snow's pretty, but come and go. Uh, I prefer a warm beach. So that's a depression that's not serious, but it's every year, and you can make it serious if you dwell on it. But normally it's not that big a deal. The incidence rate of this is higher in northern climates. Of course, that would be almost obvious since they have longer winters than we do in the south. And it's very high in Alaska because of their lack of sunlight at some points during the year. I can't remember what the figures are. I think there's part of their season where the sun shines for 15 minutes or something crazy. You can look it up if you're that interested in it. So that's seasonal depression. And then here's one that a lot of folk experience. This is normal, by the way, situational depression or adjustment disorder. Now, this can get serious. Um, and where does it come from? Things like death of a loved one or a serious illness, yours, or somebody you're very close to, financial problems, and emotional upheaval. A breakup of a marriage, for example, where one party wasn't really in favor of it and the other party demands it, and then now you got this injured, emotionally injured individual that's trying to deal with that. And then the last one, oh my goodness, this is the one that I was saving to last for you to peruse. And you've heard of this major depressive disorder. Most likely you've heard it called clinical depression. You've already heard a lot of the symptoms. The opening of this little lecture, when I gave you debilitating characteristics, well, here you are. Despondency. This is a repeat of some of those in an addition to it as well. Despondency, gloom, grief. Now, is it normal to grieve over the loss of? Yeah. But if this continues, and you're not going to believe the length of time, I'll give it to you in a moment. Difficulty sleeping or sleeping too much. Remember the insomnia, hypersomnia, lack of energy and fatigue, loss of appetite or overeating, so on and so forth. Here's an addition: unexplained aches and pains, memory problems, inability to make decisions, feelings of worthlessness we mentioned, constant worry. And look at this. Here you're depressed and you suffer anxiety because of the depression. Oh my goodness. 2 different medications called for. And then the worst thing, thoughts of self-harm or suicide. Oh my gosh. Suicide prevention hotlines, one of the best things ever created. So those are the symptoms of major depressive disorder, clinical depression. Excuse me. Lost my voice. Hang on. Sorry about that. Getting choked up about depression. Here's the deal. Here's the thing that's going to probably shock you a little bit. Um, what do you think the length of time these symptoms have to be in place before you're diagnosed with major depressive disorder, clinical depression? And the answer is 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Most people think, oh, it's got to be at least 6 months, a year. No, 2 weeks. If you're going through this, and you may, well, the question always comes up in class when I'm talking to students about this. There's always a hand or two. What about grief? Don't you grieve longer than that? It's a different process. Is there depression related to grief? Yes, but it's more in the realm of situational. So if I'm grieving over the loss of a loved one, is it going to last longer than 2 weeks? Yeah, probably, absolutely so. But what about the depressive part of it? Because grieving, as you know, is a step-by-step process. So the catch here is that, okay, I'm grieving, I'm depressed, but the depression doesn't leave. Does that make sense? So I'm depressed during the grieving process, but the depression is more pronounced than the grief is. So, boom, there you are. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of this, and you need to go speak with a counselor because it can lead to something even worse. So there you are. Such a happy subject to have to deal with. But hey, anxiety and depression, the two biggies in psychology that psychologists and counselors deal with all the time. Some people specialize in that. Hope you got something out of this. And I apologize for the frog in my throat. Talk to you soon.